you know, I don't think it matters.
Good evening and welcome to the stream this evening. Let me adjust this light. There we go. Get rid of the strobe on it. That comes from the dimmer. The way in which dimmers work, turn the lights on and off very fast. Camera, unfortunately, can see that, which is why you get that effect. So, right. What was I going to do tonight? I probably said a lot about what I was going to do tonight yesterday. I just can't remember much of it. Okay, the windows need to go darker. I need to put some marks in there. And we need to do some other stuff. Okay. I will turn the pyro on. Actually, I'll do this with a pencil first. Where's my pencil? There it is. Yeah, so we've got one about there. I knew I'd forget something. Guess what I've forgotten? My glasses. Reminds me, I must give those a clean. Switch to these glasses and I can see it a bit clearer. which will help. So they're just panel marks, but they're interesting enough to put in. Helps if you remember to heat the right tool up. I think on the train they're actual air vents, but we'll deal with them later. So what should I do now? What I should do now is darken off that area so that I can then do the train blue. Which is what we'll do. So these windows darkly tinted, so that's what I'm going to do is darken the tint on these windows. They do appear quite dark, but I don't want to make them black, for example, which is what the stripe is, even though they're relatively close to that, but there's no real need. So I'll just do a shade that I feel like. Again, what I want to try and do with this is be as smooth as I can. Because I want it to look like glass. But if I do end up with any sort of slight blobs, that's not going to be too much of a problem. It is glass, it will reflect things that are outside of it. So again, because I want this really to be as smooth as I can, I'm heating it relatively slowly. That way I've got better control over the tone, or the shade, the darkness. All different words for the same thing. And I want it even darker than that, so we'll make it a little bit more so. At this stage it's kind of goes through a stage of going sort of a grey before it starts to go brown again, so we'll just see if we can get it to the stage of just going brown. That way we get quite a nice colour. Hello, we have a visitor. Hello. We just put the hot thing to one side for the moment. Well, we're getting not to stand on the keyboard and not to stand on my reference picture. Come on. He's actually not going to come on stream, I don't think. He's going to go sit on the nice warm computer. So we can carry on. Now the style of pyrography we're doing here is a multi-shaded one. I refer to it as photorealistic, although it's not as realistic as a photograph. The nearest that it would look like would be a sepia toned photograph, like an old one, but we probably won't get that level of detail that you'd expect from a photograph. But it equally, it's not a pure black and white, which you might do with a really hot iron and just do pure black and white, so silhouette style. And it's also not a cartoon or an illustration style where there's a black outline around everything, which is then coloured in. So this one, the shades themselves define the shapes. There's no outline on them, even though you'll see an outline for the moment, but that will disappear as I fill in the blocks of colour. And as you can see, like here around the window, that edging is starting to disappear. I could do the pyrography without that edge there at all, but it does just help and make life a bit easier to do it first. It's very akin to using a light pencil mark, which you then go over if you're drawing or using watercolour or something like that. So a lot of pyrography that you will probably see, I have seen quite a bit on Twitch, it uses just the pure black and white, the silhouette style. That is, relatively speaking, easier to do and quicker for that matter, because you just want it black or not black, which means you can use you can use a lot of heat. You don't really need to control it that significantly, and it to some extent doesn't matter how long or you hold the pen on the wood. You're just after that black silhouette. This, because we're after different levels or shades of the colour, will actually take considerably longer to do, because we're mixing and juggling a lot of variables to produce just the colour that we're looking for, whatever that might be. In this particular case, it's about this sort of colour, or at least at this moment in time it's about this sort of colour. A little bit later on in the piece we may actually change this, might go darker. Really depends on what else we do in the image and whether the contrast between certain things is achieved. If it's not achieved, we may then adjust the things like this particular colour in order to give us the contrast that we're after. Because in a monochrome image, it's the contrast that tells you where the shapes are, not the colour. So you have to sort of mentally translate colour into different shades. Of course, generally speaking, you can have two different colours which are exactly the same black and white shade. Now that can work okay as long as they're not next to each other. If they are, you can't tell them apart. So then you actually have to artificially change one or other of them. Now this is a dark window and we're going to have a relatively light blue next to it, or it would be blue if I was doing it in colour, so I'm not going to have too much of a problem with the contrast between them, but I do want it to look significantly darker than the blue. So if it turns out the blue gets close to this, we'll darken this down. Now the colour is being a bit slow tonight. Does that sometimes, don't really understand why. You just have to work with it. I may even turn the heat on this tool up a little bit more. Yeah, just a bit. I'm going to be careful, as I say, I don't want it to colour too fast, which it can do, because then I lose the control that I'm after in terms of wanting it a particular shade and wanting it to be a smooth colour all the way across. Now I'm going across rather than up and down, partly because if the tooling marks show up, which will be sort of lines because the brown colour isn't quite as uniform as I might want it to be, they represent the tooling marks, but also when you're doing a long object, it is better to go along the length of the object. If you're doing a large block of colour and there's some specific reason for going the other way, which you do sometimes. If I was, for example, trying to illustrate a cylinder, now this is a cylinder and I may well do some of it when I do the body, to give the impression of a cylindrical shape, but the way in which this is done, I've just determined that it's probably better for me to do it lengthwise rather than coming at any sort of odd angle. Just one of the considerations you have to bear in mind whilst you're applying pyrography. We're still only getting a very slow colour build up. It's a little bit slower than I'd like, but I don't really want to turn the tool up much more in terms of heat. Now I can apply more heat by moving slower. But if I do that, I really do have to be more consistent in the speed that I move at and make sure I don't stop. This area in the middle here isn't quite as consistent colour wise, and I'm going to go over it again. It looks a bit lighter. Loot sign aside. Good evening. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, whoever did that. Okay, I'm leaving an area that's white wood coloured here, which I may tint a little bit later on. It's meant to be a reflection flare, which is quite a long flare. Still not getting this. I'm going to work with a bit more heat. Don't mind turning the heat up a little bit, as long as I do it slowly and get used to the heat that's being generated. Do it too fast and I will, what I've got used to it, and I will get darker streaks than I intended. So I always turn the heat up in smallish sort of steps, work with it at a particular setting for a while, and then turn it up again if I need to, or choose to, should I say. You don't need to work with it hot. Now I'm getting a few dark tooling marks that I don't really want, so maybe we'll turn it down a little bit. Again, like as I put the tool down, I'm getting little brown marks, which I'd rather not have. The way to control that is not to have it as quite a higher level of heat as I have now. Fluffy Twiglet, thank you very much. Good evening. I gathered it was either you or Fear Reaper who was lurking in the background. This section of wood, for some reason, I know it always is better to try and do things with the wood all in one go, in one sequence, so it retains some of the heat and you just keep adding to it. But just sometimes when you go back over a piece, sometimes it'll colour really nicely, adding colour to it. Other times it just doesn't. It seems really reluctant, which is kind of applying an emotion to a piece of wood, but it sort of feels that way. I'm kind of being tempted to almost stop when I'm doing this and to apply heat, but I know that's completely the wrong thing to do. That would very likely create a really dark patch, and then I'd spend quite some time trying to disguise it. So even though it's difficult getting the darker areas to arrive. I want to just carry on with the same technique, which is to, at best, to move the tool slowly. But to keep it moving, not to be tempted to stop. Also helps to try and keep the tool flat against the wood. The flatter I can keep it on the wood, the more heat I'm actually applying, because the tool is flat. I'm not using the edge of it. Whew. One of the nice things, one of the things that makes it easier for me with like a long flare reflection like that, is I don't need a sharp edge. In fact, a soft edge is better, and if I do encroach over the edge a little bit, doesn't matter. As long as everything around it is darker, it will look brighter. Got a hair on the end of that, and that was a daft thing to do just there, but never mind. I got a little tiny brown mark. Should have done it on a piece of paper. So remember when you're doing this to keep going over the edge, don't stop. If you do, you'll get a dark edge on the edge of the wood. It's not quite as consistent as I wanted, but Iwada Alice Official. Hey, what's app? App is an application. It's the sort of thing that you generally associate with mobile phones. Iwada Alice Official. Thank you very much. Sorry, my sense of humour. I assume you mean what's up? This?
I can't connect at the moment. Try again in a little bit.
Oh dear. That was close enough to her name for it to pick up. It's probably picked up on that. Okay, interesting. I wonder if you did that on purpose. I don't know. Some people do. I'll have to turn her off, I guess. Yes, I do have Windows 10. Normally she's really picky about you using a name, so I was kind of surprised. Sorry, it's my sense of humour is that. Since this is a window, I'm just going back over the top edge here. I want to try and keep it as sharp, not as a can, but as sharp as looks reasonable edge, because it's very easy for an edge to become soft, and it's a window, it's got a really sharp edge. I could cheat actually with the window and put a rubber seal around it, which it doesn't have, but I could do that, and then it would be a darker line and I'd be outlining it, and that would make it easier to do that. In this particular case I don't particularly want to do it. I mean, ultimately if I think it'll look better I will, but initially I'm trying to avoid it. Quite how brown the wood becomes and how quickly has got a lot to do with the moisture content of it. So I'm imagining some areas that don't take the colour quite as well have probably got a slightly higher moisture content. Which is why it's easier to apply pyrography to really dried out wood. in that area just around there is lighter than the rest. May do something about that, may not. With it being a, as I say, with it being a window reflective surface, the fact that it's not quite the same as the rest is just part of the character of the glass. If it was a matte surface like you were doing somebody's face, then it matters more. But there again, even a face which is a matte sort of non-reflective surface, you do get variations light across it, depending on things like skin pigment, just what the angles of light are, and the planes of the face. So you still do get variations like that, which is not so much reflections of something outside, but more just the way the light is reflected off the face. But generally speaking, on the face, it's really soft edges. You don't get a sharp edge. This one, you haven't got a sharp edge. Yeah, it's that sort of thing. But there, you get them all in everything, and you just deal with it as appropriately. Just checking which cord I've got attached to this pen. I've got two different cords. One's a heavy duty cord and the other's a more flexible cord. The heavy duty cord has got thicker wire, which is better for these sorts of pens because they use a lot more electric current to heat them up. If you use too small a gauge of wire or too thin a cord, the wire itself starts to get warm. This one's warming a little bit, which is why I was just checking which one I got attached. They don't get hot, do the cords, they just warm up slightly after a period of time. But if the main reason to sort of think about it is if the cord's heating, the tip isn't. So any heat that the cord generates means the tip isn't getting that electricity to heat it up. So you don't want hot cords, basically. The thinner cord on this particular machine is quite useful, especially with things like the writing tip, though, because it's slightly more flexible, which makes it easier when you're doing things like writing, because the cord then doesn't drag on the pen as you're using it. The thicker cord is less of a problem for that, because generally speaking, you're not being as you're not manipulating it quite as much. Now with monochrome pyrography like this, you can apply details before you do the main colour blocks. You can apply it after. It doesn't actually make any difference. If I was going to attempt to apply colour and do colour-based pyrography, which I may try at some point in the future, then it does matter which order you do them in. You get different effects depending on the order. So what I'm probably going to do next is some of what would be the blue areas of this train, like around the window here and down on the sides and on the skirt. It's kind of like more of this, but there are panel lines to go onto it as well, so I've yet to decide which exact panel lines to put on. Maybe that I'll be somewhat light in them. There's no particular need for a lot of panel lines on here. I might, for example, put the one that's around this area here, which is the door. So you'll get a sort of an outline-ish of the door, and then maybe a couple down on the side. But I may just choose to say, you know what, it looks nice as it is, I shall leave it. So even though I'm working from a reference picture which was done from a photograph originally, I can still change it. There's no reason why I have to make it look like the reference at all. I mean, after all, this one could be red where the reference picture's blue. Right, I'm going to just turn that over because it's easier to do the top line, top edge, working in the sort of the natural angle of the pen. So the back of the wood's quite warm, which it would be, of course. I've been putting quite a bit of heat into it, but it's one consideration actually. If you do pyrography on thin card, for example, then be careful what you do, what you put the card on, because you can end up getting your desk pyrographed because it's gone all the way through the card and it's been hot enough not only to apply colour to the card but to the desk underneath. Now, I've never done that to a desk, but I have put a card on top of like a board whilst I've been like cleaning the pen, and I found the board has taken a colour underneath. Again, I want quite a sharp edge if I can. It's the edge of a window. They don't tend to be fluffy and soft at the edges of windows. That's gone darker than I wanted it to. Okay, doesn't look too bad. Turn it around, take a look at with the camera. Okay, there's an area just there. Needs a little bit of toning down, yeah. You can see I've got a couple of dark spots here, which is not what I intended. Now, one of the things I do have to decide on this, and we're working with a train where it's kind of tubular, so it's quite a pronounced curve from here to the top, and the window itself is partially curved. Well, yeah, it's partially curved, so the light angle, which is sort of from up, straight up if you like, is coming down, which means the bottom edge here will be slightly darker than the top edge because of the curve. The light will strike more on here, and that's kind of the peak of it, where you've got this flare here and then get slightly darker. So at some point what I might do is make this bottom edge slightly darker, fade it up, which will actually incidentally probably get rid of those two marks there, but for the moment they are probably going to stay there. Now then, next section really is probably going to be colour around it, because that's the body of the train. It's going a bit cold now. Right. So again, this bit here is white. So I want to keep that edge. It's going to be it's a really high contrast edge with it being white. So what I'm probably going to do is just go this way, and just to get the edge in place. That's coming in a bit darker than I want it to. Let's turn that heat down just a touch, it'll make it a bit easier. Don't really want to be as dark as that, if I can avoid it. That stripe's the darkest bit. This is the window here is the next darkest, and that bit in there is about the should be about the same tone. This is kind of halfway between this and no colour at all, or maybe a third of the way up, but I want it to be relatively noticeable, the difference between them. Okay, so essentially all I've done is make that line a bit thicker. That makes it easier to come up to the edge with the tool without going over into the white area. Now, one of the good things about doing the light area here, or a lighter area here, is I can go straight over into that without worrying about stopping short of it. Which means I'll get a nice sort of joined up thing without there being a white gap that I can't easily fill. Now, this is blue metallic paint, so whilst there will be reflections, there'll be less than on the windows, which are dark. This is blue, it hides a lot of reflections. There will, in theory, there are some lens flares or reflections, sharp points on certain places where the sun just happens to be at the right angle. Jam J88, thank you very much, that's kind of you for following. Welcome. Yeah, but what I can do is put them in afterwards, because I can take a scalpel and I can scrape some of the colour away, leaving the wood underneath, the natural wood underneath, and then it will look like it's white, so it will stand out. So I can put those sort of pinpoint reflections in afterwards. Which is useful because it means I don't have to start now and sort of worry about, oh, I want to put one here and I've got to leave a little tiny space or something like that. For the new people, one of the keys to this is really consistent movement of the tip, so you don't get it too slow or too fast. So every row that I'm doing is roughly the same time. That way I get roughly the same colour. Which helps to keep a nice consistent shade, which is what I'm after, at least initially. So I say this is semi-cylindrical, therefore the top will be lighter than the bottom, but that's a level of shading I can put in afterwards. Okay, I'm making it too dark by messing about with that. I can't quite get it. I've got a little spot of light wood there. If I fiddle about with it anymore, I'll get a really dark patch, which will be really much more noticeable than the small amount of uncoloured wood that I've left. Well, at least it restarts. I have my own stream playing back at myself in another window just to one side there. It helps me to know what's going on sometimes and what delays are in there sometimes, or even if Twitch is playing up and it's accepting the broadcast without sending it out, as it happens sometimes. It's running the HTML version, HTML5 version of the player, and it's quite good because if the stream stops for any reason or it loses it, it just reloads it. It's quite good. The old Twitch player would just stop and freeze. You'd have to manually restart it. Mind you, about the only stream I ever see freeze is my own. You look right at this edge here. For some reason, that edge there, there's a relatively low contrast between the lighter area and the darker area, which they're sort of blending together a little bit. So what I might have to do is darken this window, just to avoid that sort of situation. It looks sort of soft, indistinct, but that's for later. Now if you haven't seen me say it before, I am concentrating quite a bit on this because I'm trying to be really consistent and smooth about both the placement of and the amount of heat that I'm applying to the tool and to the tip. I'm trying to. This is a sort of shiny metal engine, carriage, train. And I'm trying to make the sides look, you know, like shiny, if you like, and smooth. So that requires me really to apply a really smooth tone to the wood. So I am being quite careful about how far apart these individual strokes are, and how much heat is being applied, generally how slow I'm moving effectively, because I'm trying to, as I say, I'm trying to be really consistent about the shade of colour. At the moment the top is very slightly darker than this side. If it was the other way around I wouldn't be as bothered about it. So I'm just trying to make this side a little bit darker just to match up with the top. That's probably okay. Whew. Exercise my hand a little bit. Although I'm not grasping the pen hard, I am doing quite controlled movements, so it's like writing, your hand gets a little bit tired after a while. Okay, let's try some more. Hello, pussycat. You can't have my chair. That's what you're coming for. I wouldn't bother. Hope you've got clean feet. You're walking on my painting. And by clean feet I don't mean you sit there and wash them on my painting either. Of course, no. You will want to try and sit on the keyboard, won't you? Hopefully. No, come on, back off the keyboard. There's a good boy. Come on off the keyboard. Can't have you sat on the keyboard because I don't know what's going to happen when you do that. And slide it this way a bit. Like that. I don't know quite what was. Oh, I see. Pussycats. One word from me and they do what they like. And now he's ignoring me. And yeah. See if I can do a bit more before he starts trying to stand on the keyboard again. So if the broadcast suddenly terminates, I will restart because the pussycat will have sat on a key or something. Now these thin lines here, thin dark lines here, are just sort of a placeholder though. There's like an air vent, which I will maybe apply a little bit more detailed texture to before we finish the piece. In the meantime, they just add a little bit of detail. And we can go straight over the edge, straight onto the darker area. At worst, all that will happen is that the very edge of the darker area will just get a slightly bit darker, but it will save me having a white edge. Which is hard to get rid of if you try and stop. And try and stop just short. It's really hard to do two different things. Stop on a precise line between two different shades or colours. It's a lot easier if you can just take one over straight into the other. Generally speaking, you can take a light area obviously over into a darker area. The other way tends to be a bit problematical, but you've got a nice, comfortable, warm top of the computer. Why do you have to want to lay on the keyboard, Felix? Pussycats. Pussycats. There's an easy way and a hard way. They tend to take the hard way. The other night he was trying to go to sleep, curl up on top of my airbrush paints, and they've got spiky. The bottles have got spiky tops, so it was a bit like he was trying to go to sleep on a bed of nails. Quite how they find some areas comfortable, I do not understand sometimes. Okay, as you can see, we've got the dark edge that when I went over it. So ultimately, I'm going to try and get rid of a bit of that now. Essentially, it's fading it into the area around. Or potentially just darkening the whole thing down to that level. Now this colour does act rather like a varnish on top of the wood, So it is actually possible, if you heat it up, which is what I'm doing now, to sort of drag it, scrape it out, scrape it off, sort of thing. I'm not scraping it off, I'm more sort of just dragging it down the image, but I can thereby soften off or remove that dark area that was there, or a little bit, at least make it easier to deal with. Remove some of it, still a bit more than I want. So let's see if I can fade it a little bit more. I'll probably end up darkening the whole thing actually. Yeah, looks like I end up darkening all of it. Not particularly a problem. That's why I like to work sort of fairly tentatively in terms of shading. Like if I do now need to darken that, then I can do that. I've still left this with, this can go darker still if I need to maintain the contrast between them. Actually, what I'm looking at there, what I'm seeing is the darkish edge I've created there and another one sort of behind it. Which kind of looks sort of like so I'm still getting a bit of a curve, which I shouldn't really be at this point, but the fact that it sort of looks like that may well be to my advantage. Especially if because there's a little bit of a light band in here, so if I just darken that little bit in the middle, just still got some of, but yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is leave that for the moment. We'll come back to that. It kind of looks like I can probably just fade that across as it's still part of the compound curve, which is one reason why we may end up this area here is white. But one of the things that I almost certainly will do is actually apply some colour to it, because otherwise it doesn't look right, and even white has a shade to it. So if I want it to try and indicate the curve, for example, it looks flat. I mean, at the moment it looks too white, even though it's white, and it looks flat. There's no shade, and I can't apply shade without applying some sort of colour. So we possibly will add colour in to that, even though it's meant to be white. We'll do a very light colouring. So I'm going to do just around the cabin, I think. This is going darker than I want it to as well, but I'm dragging some of that line, which I kind of expected. At this point I need to turn it upside down. Now then, that's kind of similar sort of colour to the glass. Don't really want to take that glass too much darker in colour. Although it's tinted, I mean it's a purple tint, it's quite a dark colour, but I kind of like that as it is. So we sort of got clear glass rather than tinted glass. Which then suggests that what I'm going to need to do is to make the colour that I'm doing here for the blue a little bit darker. The pen just picked up a hair, which smells terrible, but the other thing about it is it will carbonise, and then it quite possibly will apply a dark mark to the wood. So I'll give it a bit of a clean. This is kitchen paper, so you can see how much heat it's not. If I hold it on, it'll go brown. So you can see it's not hot enough to even burn paper. Which is why you can do pyrography on paper. Like that. Actually, I wish doing a fade like that was as easy as it is on paper, on wood, as it is on that paper. We just took that over there, out of the way. Now that dark area just around there is sort of inside, and the problem I want to avoid is that this edge becoming the same colour as that. That's quite dark, and if it does, I'm going to have to darken that off. And again, it looks quite good as it is, so Now you might, one of the nice things that fools your eye is the fact that I've got a line edge on the glass. Tends to make you see two different colours, even though they're very similar. Because they're separated, you by something, you kind of expect them to be different. Just one of the weird phenomena that you come across when you're doing this sort of thing. Don't look too bad. I shall leave that for the moment. So next area is that stripe there. Before we go into the skirt, now then, one of the things I want to do is we're now starting to come over the top, so I do ideally want this to be slightly darker than the area above. I don't want it too light because this is white under the nose here, which I want to make grey because it's in shadow, which means I want it to be a different colour to that, which may ultimately dictate changing other colours around. This is kind of how it gets to build up. If this gets to be the same colour as that, which is the same colour as that, then this is going to be a dark white, therefore this has to be darker, and if this has to be darker, then okay, that has to be darker as well, and if they get darker, then the windows get darker. It's a cycle that you sometimes go through. Got a few hairs, little tiny cat hairs, but they're enough to make the tip smell. Right, burning hair is an unpleasant smell. Okay, so I turn it upside down because I want to keep that edge. So I want to be about this colour but slightly darker. There's a heck of a lot of sort of playing around with shades, remembering where shadows are and light falls, and if you're also trying to translate a colour picture into a monochrome, that can also be a challenge. If you're doing this for yourself and having a go at pyrography and you've got a colour picture that you want to try and represent, if it's an electronic picture and you've got the facilities to do it, put it into a painting program, and generally speaking, or a image manipulation program, generally speaking, you can tell it to remove the chrominance or remove colour, and it will give you a black and white. Sometimes it'll describe it, I think, as the alpha channel. Remove the colour channels, leave the alpha channel, but you'll get a black and white or grayscale image that you can then work from, which is easier to do than trying to manually in your own mind decide whether two shades of a red and a green are which one's lighter than the other in a grayscale. Do one. Okay. That was Mrs. Zaragoza. Well, at least that makes a change from my computer. Cleo, the cat that never comes in this room, has been in this room now for quite a few days. And I think actually what she's doing is following one of the male cats. Because one of the male cats has been asleep on a windowsill, for example, and this morning she was asleep on the same windowsill. They have a tendency to follow each other around, the cats. If one finds a place, you can guarantee the other one will be in it before long. But she's just gone and stood on my wife's computer keyboard. She did it to mine the other day and completely locked out the passwords and things. It took me an hour and a half to get back into the machine. Okay, we're about the same sort of range, but slightly darker than this, which is what I'm after. Now I just keep applying that same colour. This is proving quite interesting because it's the first time I've done, in pyrography terms, the first time I've done a vehicle or an object like this. I've done quite a few animals, generally cats. It's not the first time I've done a vehicle. That's not actually true because I've done I have done another train, but I've done them on practice stuff. I've done a train and a plane, but I've done them on practice boards. So this is the first time I've done it on a production board or an actual sort of non-practice board. When I'm practicing, I use hardboard, which is a brown wood anyway, and I do that because that wood's cheaper, and I don't feel quite so bad then if I mess up on it. And I have to throw it away, which I'm quite lucky over. I've not actually had to throw anything away. I have been able to either rectify it or be able to change the story slightly to account for the error. And some of the errors, like changing the story, I know they're errors. Most people looking at the image don't, but which is why one tip as an artist is when you're showing somebody your work, don't explain what's wrong with it. Most people can't see it. Actually, I can now do this the other way just for this section. Yeah. Now this is two blue, well it's the same blue side by side actually, but what you've got is this is curling under as though it's going to curl right under the train. This is a side skirt which is on the side of it, which is sort of at an angle to it. So if you imagine a curve and then this an angle, so it gets quite dark to that point, and then this is sort of tilted more towards the sky, therefore it appears to be a lot lighter blue than this, just because of the angles that are involved, and the way the light is reflecting off those off the angle and where the shade is, so to speak. So I can go over that and then darken this top bit down a little bit, just so you sort of see the contrast between the two, even though they're the same colour. And then we sort of got to fade it a little bit as we come up into here as well, get slightly darker as well as we come up, because this starts then to come underneath the train, or underneath the edge of the train. It also happens to start to curve the other way as well. There's a lot of curves going on here. But knowing where the curves are help you sort of work out where the shading needs to be. Because the shading is the important bit that tells you, gives you the 3D shape, tells you where things, you know, where things are in relation to one another. I'm just working the other way because the right hand side of this particular tip actually is hotter than the left. And it's actually, well, if I were to turn the heat up, you can actually see it on the camera. The two sides are slightly different. We did that when I first put the tip in. The camera is slightly more sensitive to infrared, so I couldn't particularly see it in person, but on the camera you could see one side was a different colour to the other side. Now I've got a richer brown than I've got here, so I didn't need this to go a bit more coloured. That's blue, so I'm not so bothered about the edge. Picked up a hair again. Sometimes you can't see it, you can smell it. I was just thinking, there's so much for what people call wood burning. It doesn't even burn paper. Now, there's something about pyrography that knows when you want to try and get to an edge. So like I'm doing now, trying to come away from this right hand edge, it always gets darker than you want it to be. And yet I can go backwards and forwards like this and not get that same colour. I know why it is. It is because I am almost having to, because I want that sharp edge, stop and then move the pen. So I put it down and move. putting it down for a fraction of a second, it's not moving. It applies heat from a not moving pen, which gets really into the wood fairly quickly. When I'm doing this across here, I'm landing the pen whilst it's moving. It doesn't apply quite as much heat, but it's it can be a little bit frustrating when you're trying to just go up to the edge and stop the colour. That it always wants to be slightly darker. So that is sort of one of the tricks, is to actually do it first, and then adjust the rest of the panel to the colour that you've ended up with. Technically, I suppose it would be possible to do something like put masking tape across there, but then I'd be dealing with the fact that I've got a sticky residue on the wood when I come to add pyrography to it. But that is kind of something I've just thought of now. Would be one way in which you could create that sharp edge, because you can then go straight off from one to the other. Because they're at slightly different heights, though, you would get a slight white edge, so you'd have to not position it slap bang on the edge, but just slightly in. And you could only go off. You couldn't go the other. Well, you could go the other way, but you'd still get a problem with a white edge. I'm starting to ramble a little bit there, but as I said earlier, it's left hand edge I'm not that bothered about, because this is also blue, the other side of it, and it is actually a lighter blue, so it's the same blue which looks lighter. Now, interesting, this section of wood here took colour quite easily and stopped almost there, which is rough, which is, looking at it, is where one of the rings goes through. So this bit of tree growth in the middle here is taking colour a little bit better than that ring there. Maybe the weather conditions were different those years and one bit's more drier than the other, don't know. But you do often see that different bits of wood take colour slightly differently, and it usually does seem to be along a ring boundary where they change. Now the ring itself, the ring boundary itself, has gone slightly darker. Now birch doesn't usually do that. You usually, whilst you can still see the rings even through the thing, they don't take colour particularly stronger or weaker than the rest. For some reason this one just around here has. Okay, well it's a rather quiet in chat today. Is everybody watching something else? And yeah, I guess perhaps the are they broadcasting packs? I think they're broadcasting certainly some things from packs, aren't they? Some of the streamers are broadcasting from packs. So what that means is, if you've got any questions about pyrography, relief carving, scraper board, chainmail jewellery making, or punchcraft, feel free to ask them. There's plenty of time in chat to do so. In actual fact, I do airbrushing as well, engraving, glass engraving, rotary carving, cross stitch, rug making, and that's just the things I can think of, without including things like the modelling, model trucks and tanks and things like that. So, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I don't mind. Some of these things have only been doing a relatively short time, like the jewellery making is I've only been doing that a few months, but the airbrushing has been doing well on and off for several years, along with the carving. And pyrography actually is going on for a few years now. I even actually have at the other side of the studio a set of fusible beads ready for a project when I can think of one that I want to do. I do like trying out new things from time to time, which is one of the reasons why somewhere around I've got a 3D printer. I say somewhere around because it's a kit and it's in a box, and I can't actually remember where the box is. I don't have enough space in the studio to put it together, and even if I had some space to put it together, I don't have any place to put it when it is together. So, I've got that to put. Hopefully, when I get a new studio, which I'm hoping for later this year, I should be able to do that. And that, as an artist, the possibilities of doing things like sculpting, computer sculpting, I guess, and having them printed out is quite intriguing. And one of the things that quite intrigues me, but I might do it seriously, I might want to look at a Delta printer, is I've seen what gets described as tiki vases, which are sort of, well, I guess they derive from the sort of Polynesian carvings, the tiki gods, which were generally done things like tree trunks. But then I guess if you hollowed the thing out, you get a vase or something similar. And they kind of intrigue me to the point of, I would like to be able to try something like that. And as I say, that may require a Delta printer just for the to be able to get the height necessary, but that's something I'm looking forward to perhaps trying in the not so distant future, but not so close future either. But hopefully we'll get a chance to do that. And interestingly, of course, and you may or may not know this, but you can actually get plastic that's filled with wood fibre, so like a plastic wood or an artificial wood, which will go through some 3D printers. So the possibility, when you're putting it through the printer, if you slow the printer down or the extrusion rate down, the wood fibres, because your nozzle for the plastic is at several hundred degrees to melt the plastic. The wood, of course, that's in there, the wood fibres react to the heat. That's what's happening here. So if you slow down the print, the wood fibres get darker. You speed it up, they get lighter. So you can make an object and apply pyrography to it at exactly the same time. But one of the intriguing things for me would be whether, having made an object like that, you can then apply pyrography to it using a pyrographic pen. Now, quite whether that ends up melting the plastic or colouring the wood fibres, no, that's something that might be interesting to experiment with. I might not do it with my favourite pen to start with, just in case you get plastic all over it, but that's something I am looking forward to being able to try. So once we get the space, I will actually be building that printer on stream. So you'll get to see it built. And what it produces. Not necessarily sure I'd show it producing things all stream type of thing, but we might produce a model for it, and then that'll just print in the background somewhere. And for sort of a similar sort of reason, I was just intrigued by it, I have a miniature laser cutter as well. It is a miniature. It kind of will cut foam and thick card, but that's about it. But the thing that intrigued me about it is I've got a variable power module for the laser, which actually means that I can turn up or turn down its cutting power, or if you do it on a thicker piece of material, not its cutting power but its burning power. Pyrography again. But done by a laser cutter. It's actually called raster. Was it raster? Something to do with raster, because it has to go across line by line by line. So you get an old TV style 4 or 5 line TV type of image. But it was looked like another interesting thing to experiment with. And that's another kit to be built. That's the smaller one. Actually, I could potentially build that one because it is a smaller kit, but I've got that to one side somewhere. Oh yes, that's right. Building the kit I could do it in the studio at the moment, but it would be potentially a bit harder to do the electronics in the studio because I need to get a soldering station out, and that takes up space on the desk, which I don't have. But that is something to look forward to, for me anyway. What else have we got to look forward to? Finishing a tank. I have a model tank, a 1/12. Yes, 1/12 scale tank to finish off. It's half finished at the moment. The lower half is done, the top half isn't. To finish that requires painting as well as assembly and construction, so I paint the models with an airbrush. So that to do that would require sort of airbrush model fabrication and things like that. It's a remote controlled tank as well, so there's remote controls to fit into it. The bottom half is sat just over to one side of me, but I've never actually yet got around to doing the top half, and I currently don't have the space, so that's sat there. Yeah, we did build a quadcopter on stream, some people may remember. I must actually get round to flying that again. The first flight session with it wasn't fantastically good. It took a lot of trimming and wasn't actually as stable as its reputation supposedly puts it. So I think perhaps I need to reset its calibration and start again and just see if it gets any better. And another remote control model that I want to do at some point in the future. It actually is one of two things. It's a bus, but it's one of two things. Either a bendy bus or a double-decker bus. I'm not sure which. I've got quite a few. Well, I've got the main chassis parts for that, but again, it's space. Something of that size is about 3 feet long, about a metre long. My workshop space is not much bigger than now. You're looking at the studio space and the workshop space. It's not much bigger than that. So that's sat there for a bigger weight in the bigger studio. But I'm looking forward to being able to do that. That'll be what they call scratch built. It won't be built from a kit. Some of the parts will come from a kit, like the axles and the wheels, but the main chassis and the rest of it will all be scratch built. By which what that means is you design it yourself and you put the bits together yourself. They're not pre-cut or anything like that. Actually, that reminds me. For the tank, I need a low loader so that the articulated truck that's behind me can tow it. I've got the parts for that. That's another scratch build thing, design. I've got all the aluminium and plastic to and some of the wood to make that, but I haven't got round to that yet either. Again, studio space is the problem, but you might see that done on stream as well, depending on whether I feel like doing something, because that's quite a long job. So you might see me do bits of it on stream when I get round to being able to start that again. So as you can see, I kind of do a lot of varied stuff, mainly because I potentially will get bored doing the same thing for lots and lots of time, because what streaming is doing, of course, is forcing me into doing 2 hours of art or crafts every night, which is quite a lot. And so before I was streaming, if I was doing something like carving an object that's going to take a long time, I could put it to one side for a while and come back to it, and go and do something else, like watch a film. Can't do that while I'm streaming, so switching between different crafts stops me getting bored. So you will see lots of different things from me, and as I get the opportunity to do other things like construct a model bus, then you may well get to see that on stream. I know for next year, for example, I am planning doing some model railway stuff on stream next year. So N scale or T scale or both. For those of you who are familiar with model railways, will know what those scales are. Those of you who don't, what the scale refers to is what you might think, how the size of the model in relation to the real thing. But with model railways, what they do is describe the scale of the track to a standard gauge track, i.e. what you get on a normal full-sized railroad. And so N scale stands for 9mm, which is the distance between the tracks. And I forgot what that is in terms of actual ratio to the full size, but a full size track is about 4'6" and a bit, which is about 1.5 meters, so you could probably sit down and work it out. And T scale, T stands for 3mm between the tracks, which is tiny. Yeah, it's tiny. Which isn't 3 times smaller than 9mm. It's 9 times smaller than 3mm, than 9mm. So you can get, for as a T scale layout, you can get a full T scale layout on that board. Chloe 99 and 12 gauge 42,000. Thank you. Welcome to the studio. Sorry, I'm just rambling on while I'm doing something I wasn't looking up. What am I making? I am making a pyrographic image. Pyrography, painting with heat, or more literally fire writing, but no fire and I'm not writing. So painting with heat. Electrically heated tool, which you saw me using. The heat causes the wood to go brown. The more heat, the browner it goes, or the darker the brown it goes. And by various manipulations I can control the shade. So I'm making a black and white or a monochrome image of this particular train, which is from an old model of what is in Disneyland in Florida. Night Raid ZPVP. How am I today? Well, I'm great, thank you very much for asking, and I hope you are as well. So yeah, this is the trains. I think they got replaced a few years ago, so this is an older model, probably from about 20 years ago, which is probably when I took the original picture, which I used to it will be about that long ago. The reference picture for this is actually an airbrush painting I did when I first started airbrushing, which was taken from an airbrush painting of a photograph that I'd taken of this particular train. And well, this train that looks somewhat similar to this. So my reference picture is here. So that's what I am intending to try to put down on the pyrography. Something like that. You need to sharpen your chisels or buy a new set. You must be sharpen your chisels. I was about to say, if you're considering buying a new set, you're either doing a heck of a lot of work or you're abusing them. But there again, when you say sharpen your chisels, are you meaning they're just slightly dull or they're completely blunt? Because if they're completely blunt, then you are doing something wrong. But if they just need tweaking off, then you don't need to buy a new set for that. You just need something like, well, just to restore an edge, a leather strop will do it. But some polishing compound on a leather strop is enough for hand chisels, or most hand chisels. So are these hand chisels or mallet based chisels? Generally speaking, if they're really blunt, then you're trying to probably pull too much wood out at once. Unless of course they're like second-hand chisels or something like that you've got. Of course, I don't know. Hand chisels. Wow, if you've got them actually blunt, it's really hard to do. Is that? Yeah, it's really hard to do unless you usually. What have I seen people do that would blunt a chisel like that? generally speaking, it's kind of like trying to lever the wood off with a chisel rather than cutting it. But okay. Now you explain. If you use it on a lathe, yes, I can understand that. I can understand that, using them on the lathe. So that explains it. Yes, I can see them going blunt quite quickly there. You've got a lot of wood moving under the chisel at any one moment in time, and it's really abrasive. So yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like you're going to need to invest in a set of sharpening stones, especially if you're going to use them continue to use them on your lathe. Otherwise, you'll end up needing to keep buying them, and that could get expensive. And you, there again, if you do have a lathe, you're probably better getting the chisels which are more suited to being used on a lathe, so they'll be long handled chisels rather than a hand chisel. You've got a better control over the leverage then when you've got the chisel on the post, resting on the post, because you've got the long handle. You've got a lot more finer control, if you like, and leverage. Got a pair 30. Oh, you've got to sharpen them. You can't just discard 30-year-old chisels. Yeah, I've actually got a set of sharpening stones around here, but I've never actually used them. I did get them to sharpen some chisels I got given as a present, which were, shall we say, the sort of chisels you get in a hobby craft shop, and they weren't sharp at all, and they won't easily sharpen. But I did get a set of stones. I'm trying to think what I've got. I've got something like a 60 grit, and then a 2000 and a 6, I think. So yeah, you kind of need at least 2 stones, a fairly fine one, and I guess if I was only to pick a couple, I'd probably pick something around about 800, and then up into sort of 3000 as a stone. But if you can sort of get to sort of, well, sometimes you get them two-sided, or they put 2 stones together, and so then you can go for something like in sort of the few hundreds, and then a fairly smooth stone for the final polishing. And having said which, though, since you've got a lathe, you've got the possibility of putting a rotary stone on the lathe, and then you can work with a fairly fine rotary stone, because the lathe will do the hard work for you of turning it, so you don't actually have to sit there pushing the chisel backwards and forwards. I'm going to do a little bit more of this, just for a couple of minutes or 5 minutes, but we are approaching the end of the stream now. But I'm just going to carry on for a little bit longer. What I've got to try and do is keep the angle, keep the so carving comes when this is finished, Night Raid. So that's my that's the next craft when this is finished, is carving. I'm not quite sure what I want to carve yet, but that's probably going to be in at least a couple of, well, I'm guessing a couple of weeks. Generally, a pyrographic piece this sort of size takes something like about 20 to 30 hours to complete, which at 2 hours a night is about 2 weeks. Now then, this is the same colour as this, but is lighter because of the angle. So if I don't get a satisfactory colour, I'll end up being a bit dark on this, and if I do, what I'll have to do is darken this a little bit, but I may well do that anyway because of the way this is curved. This edge should be darker than higher up. It's sort of a circular sort of sided train. Yeah, it'll be about 2 weeks though before I get round to it though, Night Raid. So if you don't want to stick around, that's quite alright. Or you might want to, if you're not already, follow, and then you'll get the notifications, and it'll be quite obvious when I'm doing the carving. It'll say something like carving the whatever. Not quite sure yet what I want to try. I actually have a half completed cat 3D sort of, it was intended to be a full 3D carve, so I may well see about finishing that one. Or we may go for something else, something bigger. Every piece that I carve is an adventure. I generally try something I've not tried before, which isn't hard to find, and see how it goes, what techniques I need to learn or what I have to work out. It's fun. Okay, sorry, Night Raid. I remember. How do I put this politely? As you mentioned, you haven't been here for a little while, and therefore my memories are sieve, and I tend to forget lots of things, like where my keys are, or things like, what was I hunting for? Oh yeah, I was hunting for. I've got a box here. There's a plastic box inside this, and I have spent about a week hunting for a plastic box, not this one. Because I knew where this was, but because the jewellery rings that I use, I keep in plastic boxes of about that size, and there's they're in individual boxes in the big box, and I was counting them and counted 17 boxes, and it looked like there was space for another one, and I spent about a week looking for that box, and eventually, for some reason, I put them in a different way, and they fit with no space for an extra box. And I eventually then went back to the shop where I got the box from to find out there's only 17 in there, and I just spent a week looking for a non-existent box. So you don't need to be sorry about not watching the stream. That's all right. You know. I don't expect people to sort of always watch or be around, or even be interested. I mean, I do a lot of stuff, and I can quite imagine that some of it is not of interest. You have an interest in the carving. You might not have an interest in this, or the jewellery, or So I'm not expecting everybody to watch all the time. It'd be nice to expect somebody to watch occasionally. I don't mean you. I mean just there's thousands of people on Twitch. Wouldn't it be nice if occasionally every one of those 1,000 just went and looked at a different stream? But that's not going to happen. But no, I don't need to be sorry. But I hope your internet is working okay now. I know it can be frustrating when that goes out. I'm lucky here. I have 2 feeds, so I can switch between them if necessary. One's faster than the other though, so I'm not sure I could stream on the slow speed one, but at least I'd be able to get on. I know I can watch streams on the slow speed one, but I don't know about stream itself. Okay, so that's not bad for colouring around there. I'm trying to apply that same colour down here. I will want to try and do some shading to indicate the curve, because there's a curve. As you can see, the nose curves to a point. That means this curves as well. This skirt on the side also comes to a point at this edge here, so it sort of curves that way, so it's kind of a compound curve as well. So I want to get some sort of shading in there as well to sort of indicate that sort of shape if I can, but for the moment it's kind of just block colouring, and we'll try and put some of the shading in afterwards. Your upload is 20 megabits, so it's, yeah, that's not bad. What do I get here? I get about 10 here. I've got about 80 down and about 10 up. I can sustain, so I'm not streaming at anything like that. I'm streaming at about 1.6 megabits, but I can I do have the bandwidth available if necessary. The other one is I think I only get about a meg and a bit on the other link upload, and 8 megs down. Now between these two sections, and I'm probably going to have to darken this because this is meant to be white, and if I just apply a shade and leave this rest uncoloured, it actually will look odd. So I may have to colour it all fairly lightly to then shade it, but a light colouring is going to be fairly close to this, so it means I'm going to have to darken these down as well. If I darken this down, I'm going to have to darken this because this and this are the same colour. And if I darken those, these are the windows, I'm going to have to darken the windows. It's kind of a cycle. You're using Virgin Media. Oh, okay. Mine's the main line's an Infinity line, BT, and the other one's a BT line as well. But just a an old capped 8 megabits link. I'm waiting while they're just trialing something like 300 megabit a BT, so I'm hoping they decide that's a successful trial and start rolling that out. Mind you, I don't actually need any more bandwidth, to be honest. I can already watch 3 HD broadcasts. I don't have a 4K screen, and I don't think Twitch is broadcasting 4K yet, so I can watch 3 HD streams on, one on each monitor, and I can actually stream at the same time. Obviously, different directions, so it doesn't make much difference. But so I kind of don't really need any more bandwidth. But it always sounds nice, doesn't it, to have sort of the extra speed. I mean, most websites, that if I'm just browsing, most websites won't even use a tenth of the available bandwidth anyway. So They can't keep up, so I don't really have any use for the high-speed links. I'm not gaming, so the ping doesn't fantastically interest me or anything like that. And this is the train. It's running on a concrete beam, so I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do a concrete texture. That could be interesting. I have an advantage. The company I work for pays for my internet connections, so I don't have a problem with bills. Well, not for that anyway. But yeah, everything else I have to pay for, but luckily not that. I work from home, you see, so they pay for the connection. Okay, well, unfortunately it's what, 20 past, nearly 25 past 10. I've gone on a little bit longer than I normally would. I normally stream till around about 10 p.m. Yeah, but I have to work hard for that, and it takes up space, studio space, so it means I can't do as much crafting because I would have space for my works PC and things, which you don't need the space for. So yeah, so we've well, what have we done today? We have darkened off this window. We've applied colour along the top of the train, around the cockpit here, and underneath and down this side, and we've applied some colour to the side skirt here. Almost certainly that side skirt is going to need to go darker because this area is intended to be white, but there will need to be some shading of the white here. I'm going to shade it first and see whether we need to colour the rest of the white, but generally speaking, my experience says when I shade the white area around here, it will look odd that it's, even though it's shading, it will look odd that this is effectively a colour and this isn't. So I am expecting that if I shade in this white area here, and the under the nose here will be shaded as well, it's also white. If I shade this area in, I am expecting I'm going to have to shade that. Shading of this area certainly is probably going to mean that it's approaching this colour, and if it approaches it too closely, then I'm not going to see the contrast. I'll need to darken it, and then that will approach that colour, and it's a snowball. I go through all of them then to make them darker, but that remains to be seen. We'll see how it looks. But that's it for tonight. It's looking more like an image now rather than a whole bunch of lines. I'm just looking at it on the window, which is, when I'm looking up like that, I'm actually looking at my OBS output window and the chat window to the side of it. So if you wonder what I'm looking at, that's what I'm looking at. But looking at the OBS output, it's quite useful because it's a bit like I've stood up and stood back about 3 feet. The camera does seem to give me that same sort of view, so it's quite useful to keep looking at occasionally. Yeah, but I'm quite pleased with that. It's coming along. I think the nose should have been a bit longer, but I can't do anything about it now. It looks a little bit short. Still, too bad. It's fun. Whatever way it is, it'll look good in the end. So what I'm going to do is say thank you all for watching. If there's anybody that's watching that isn't following, then of course, as do all those streamers, we encourage you to push that follow button. Let Twitch notify you when I go live. If you don't trust it or just want the notification, then you're quite welcome to follow me on Twitter at Zaragonart. Details also are below the stream window, and they'll be on the end plate in a moment in case you forget. If you'd just like to try and catch me tomorrow night, my stream time will be at approximately 8 PM UK time, 1900 hours GMT, or about 2.5 hours ago was 8 o'clock, so that time tomorrow. Thank you all. See you again on a future stream. Bye bye.